Okay, we'd like to welcome on our guest, Dr. Harvey Castro. Thank you for joining us, Dr. Castro. I really have enjoyed following you on LinkedIn. I love that you are taking an innovative approach in healthcare and bringing large language models, ChatGPT. There's lots of different companies formulating those models because you have been for the last, 2 decades. You have been a healthcare innovator, a physician, a CEO of a healthcare system, and you bring so much wonderful knowledge to the area. So, again, thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
All right. Well, let's dig in there. I was wondering how you found your love for talking on this topic. I mean, you seem very passionate about it, and so it's definitely not traditional for physicians to be early adopters of healthcare innovation.
Yeah, good catch. I have to go into the background real quick. I started playing with the iPhone. And the story goes, I was in the emergency room coding a patient, and this is when the iPhone 1 came out. And I had asked the nurse, I was like, hey, we need to start this IV drip. And she got this big textbook, started going through it, found the dose, verified it, and then started. And I thought in my mind, oh my gosh, no. There's got to be a better way. We got to do this within seconds. The person's dying, they're coding. And I taught myself how to program and did the first IV meds app in the world, and it went viral. And so fast forward, the reason I like sharing that story, because it kind of makes more sense. I was playing with ChatGPT. I think I lucked out. It happened to come out that day. And I'm playing with it thinking, oh my gosh, this is going to change healthcare. Like, this is going to give access to people that don't. And this is going to help doctors in so many ways. And so it's kind of funny. I started writing a book on it. Christmas holidays, my wife's like, what are you doing? And I'm like, oh, I'm writing about this ChatGPT and healthcare. And she's like, chat who? What are you talking about? She's like, I don't know what this is. And then I explain it to her. She looks at me with a serious face and says, no one's ever going to read your book. And no one knows what this stuff is. And you're going to be telling people for months.
That's
cold-blooded. And people are still going to be like, what are you talking about? And so I was like, I don't care. I'm still doing it. I'm going to still tell my doctor friends and share it with them.
Well, I think, though, we are starting to see some interest. I've been talking about digital health solutions in healthcare and writing on that. And I think when I first started writing and talking about it, I don't think anybody was reading it. But now you're starting to really see interest peaked. And tell us how you think it can really address physician burnout, which is at an all-time high right now.
Yeah, no, that's an awesome question on many levels. Number one, there's different parts of being burnout. The most obvious people talk about is the heavy administrative part of me having to dictate, type. I'm looking down on purpose, like staring at my keyboard that I can't look at the patient. Well, now AI is going to make it nice where this conversation we're having can be all transcribed and it's being integrated into the electronic medical record. And so from a workload, I'll give you a real case point. At one point, I managed, over 50 doctors. And I hated when some of my doctors were older and they would only type with 2 fingers. And they would stay 2-3 hours after their shift. And their shift was like 12 hours. And I'm like, oh my God, bless your heart. You're here for 15. And then you're coming back in another 9 hours now to work again. I was like, this can't happen. And so they're like, oh, let me get a scribe. And then I felt bad that this was going on. So now that happens. The second layer of that burnout is just communication. Here we are talking to one another, but there's some doctors that are, I'm going to say, a little more stern and maybe can brush up their empathy skills. Well, now with AI, a lot of these issues with empathy and let's just say, be blunt, malpractice, comes from not taking your time and not doing certain things in your patient interaction. Now using AI to help you personally, to help you be more empathetic, to help you with your weaknesses. I see that as a strength now for our healthcare system.
Right. So Kevin brought up a really great point that I want to touch back on before we brought you on. We were talking about the black box. Why does that scare us? And I think you really tapped in, like, why does that bother us that we don't know what's going on during the decision making of AI? Let us know from a physician perspective.
You see, that's the hard part. Everything is balance in life. Everything is, we need to know. As a doctor, I feel really confident about, XY disease because I can literally kind of go through the decision process. Here's AI, this black box, and I don't know how they went from point A to C. And so we as healthcare professionals want to know. because our profession matters so much in the sense that if we make a mistake, people die. It's not like, okay, you're going to lose some money, or yeah, you bought the wrong stock today because of AI. No, it's literally someone's dead. And so we want to like look under the hood and say, okay, how did you make that decision? What did you do? And so one of the common things is, everyone's like, oh, the AI is outdated. It was backdated back a couple of years ago. You can't use it. No, you can still use it. It's just you got to learn how to use it. And that's why I'm a big advocate right now, explaining how to use it.
No, I think that's an excellent point. And, James, when we're looking at from a malpractice perspective, like if you're using a new tool, like what are the things are you going to think about there for the physician?
Sure. And, that Dr. Castro, this was something we didn't get into yet, but, in terms of the services versus, call it devices, I mean, especially in healthcare, you have, from a legal standpoint, you have, okay, is this a product liability issue? Or is this a medical malpractice issue, that you potentially are looking at the physician with respect to liability? I mean, do you get any, I guess, with respect to the physicians that you talk to, is that a concern as well, just from a liability standpoint? Where do we fall? Is this going to be our fault if it goes bad? Does that make sense?
I love this topic.
It's a long question.
This is huge. And from a legal point, I love that I'm talking with lawyers, not with doctors.
Sure.
It's fine. Let me preface by saying at the end of the day, every doctor is responsible for their decisions. If I listen to your heart and I say, oh, my stethoscope didn't work and that's why I didn't hear it right, is it on the stethoscope manufacturer or is it on me?
That's
It's going to be on me.
That's right.
If I use, I'm going to date myself. I can use my phone and I'm looking at references and the reference is wrong. Is it that the reference isn't me? No, it's me again, because I'm the decision maker. I went to school and I need to personally evaluate. Going back to that first point, I need to look under the hood for this AI product and say, okay, this is valid or incorrect. And I ultimately am responsible for that decision. Here's the interesting part. Right now, the standard of care is whatever is practice.
Right.
What if, now I don't want to go into it too much, but we can, depending on what AI we're talking about, right now we're talking about ChatGPT, that type of AI. But what about the AI that's looking at CAT scans?
I was going to ask you about this. I'm glad you're going here.
Okay. And what if one of my buddies has this? I'm a little jealous, but basically the skinny is patient shows up with stroke-like symptoms. CAT scan has AI. AI is literally looking at the read and saying, oh, this is a stroke. And it's texting the radiologist, texting the doctor saying, hey, look at this CAT scan ASAP. And so what happens now is the ER doctor's like, hey, we got a stroke. We got to jump on it. But what about the hospital across the street that decides we're not going to pay for that technology? And what if a lawyer like you guys, awesome lawyers, come up and say, hey, the standard of care is having this AI, and this person now didn't get the antidote, didn't get the TPA, and because of it, now they're having damages.
No, and I want to take that. I think I want to take that a step further, Dr. Castro, because we always know that AI is learning and we're adding more and more data, so it's changing. So what if the standard of care is to rely upon, AI, and you just said you as a doctor, you're the final decision maker. You rely upon it, and it gives you a bad output. So it's really a double-edged sword right now.
Yeah, let's take it to another level.
We're just leveling on levels.
I like it.
I saw this huge statement from the president of the AMA, I think it was last week, and his angle this year, or one of his things that he wants to push, is that doctors are ultimately kind of shove this AI in their face and say, here you go. And ultimately, they're responsible. But what if the AI is wrong? What if it's doing things wrong? Who really is responsible? At the end of the day, the way the law is written, the way it's lawyers going to push it, it's going to be back on the doctor. And in fact, I always tell the doctors, I'm like, hey, no matter what you do here, you're ultimately responsible. If you can't go out and say, oh, OpenAI, we need to sue. They're the responsible ones. Now, here's the best part of it. Here's the punchline. Here's the fun part. The minute this becomes the standard of care, in my opinion, I'm not a lawyer, but the minute this becomes the standard of care, I think that's when things will change. Because at that point, now doctors can say, hey, this is the standard of care. These are the tools. This is the output. how can I defend myself here? This is what led me wrong, and this is it. That's going to be an interesting dilemma. But before we get there, go ahead.
Then, Dr. Castro, it's all of a sudden becoming a products liability case.
Let's talk about that.
Maybe. Well, and to the first point, James, Mysty, Dr. Castro, I think that to the hospital that's across the street from the hospital that maintains a certain degree of AI assistance with, its radiology department, I think largely there is nothing wrong with a hospital that doesn't have the capabilities to do those things. And that
now.
I don't think it would even matter I think it would matter from a standard of care perspective, but I don't think, or what I think would be necessary, Mysty, would be laws in place mandating that everyone has some degree of AI.
Well, that's not what the standard of care is.
I know, but it's almost like if you think about it, like for instance, I'm thinking about like airbags.
Okay.
And when there were certain vehicles, when automobiles were being developed, certain vehicles had certain kinds of airbags, canopies, leg bags, all those sorts of things. And that led to better safety results for the passengers in the vehicle. It wasn't then turned into a standard of care issue. No, the DMV, DOT came in and said, hey, I don't know who it is, maybe Volkswagen clearly has the jump on how to best deploy airbags during a crash. This is a mandate for the entire industry now. You need to have canopy. You need to have,
That's
steering
a great
column.
point.
You know what I mean?
Dr. Castro, and I would like you to weigh in on this. So what's going to be, doctors love and hate regulation. I represent them all the time. So what do you think what's going to be necessary to get in there and regulate and make standards so that the medical community trusts AI more?
I think the ultimate is going to be, and you're going to laugh when I say this, it's going to be another large language model. It may be ChatGPT 7 or 8. And in a serious note, I think it's going to be, let's just say, a large language model for that specialty. And if you go underneath the hood and look at this thing, the FDA has to regulate these items. And here's the beauty. Large language model has to pivot, has to change. The fact that we put information in it, it's going to change. And every time you change the model, you got to go back and get FDA approval. So this is going to be really tough for the FDA. They're going to either have to change their rules or create another way of regulating this. Now, to answer your question, how to do it, the reason I went into all that background is we're going to have doctors reinforce learning, meaning right now ChatGPT, if you guys didn't know about this, is kind of crazy. It was reinforced by humans, but those humans were in Africa and they got paid pennies to reinforce the learning from the model.
Wow.
And so if you think about it, if you're asking a medical question, this was to a layman person looking at it and saying, yeah, that looks like a good idea. Sure. Let's reinforce
That's
that
tough,
now.
Jace. That's tough to think about. And I used ChatGPT a couple times for some serious things that I need to know the answer to.
Yeah. And so my point is this, for a doctor to trust it, it's going to require doctors to reinforce it. And I always say this, it's not any doctor. Just because you have an MD or DO behind your name makes you a doctor. No, it's going to be the right doctor. And who that right doctor is, if I'm creating a program or a product that's in the emergency room, then it makes sense to have human reinforced learning from ER doctors and nurses and healthcare providers in that silo, but really doctors. And that's where we're headed. And I think that's going to be the future. And that's going to be the thing that will become the standard of care.
No, and I agree. And I think that one of the issues we see is, go back to AI's learning. We depended on the data. I think there's also going to have to be some rules that require it to retest every so often, recertify, because we want to make sure that it's still, 2 years from now delivering reliable results.
You can hit with an IE.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I love what you just said. I just took an AI advanced course, and they're talking about this theory of thrift. And basically, here's the model today, but with time, it kind of changes, and then you got to recertify it, or you got to change it because it doesn't apply. To my other example, it's reinforced learning. If you have the wrong doctors reinforcing the wrong part of medicine that they don't know, then it's going to thrift. It's going to change. It's not going to give you the same output, because now let's say us 5 were going into ChatGPT, or let's take it another level. Let's say if I called all my ER friends and I was at a national conference with the ER, and I said, hey, everybody turn on their phones. Let's get on ChatGPT, ask the same question. Let's reinforce and let's push this one thing. The model will look at that and say, wow, we just got 10,000 inputs for this one question, maybe our model is wrong. Maybe we need to pivot a little. So that's what I'm saying. It's still kind of, it can be pushed a little and it can be wrong.
Would an emergency room setting benefit from AI?
Oh yeah,
Dr. Castro, how? Because I'm thinking an emergency room setting. There's a lot of judgment calls, a lot of quick thinking, a lot of quick decisions, a lot of experience going to those decisions in the ER. Because those are some of the. I always thought some of the more well-rounded, physicians or doctors. I appreciate it because I'm an ER doctor. So thank you. See, there you go. So I'm just thinking, how beneficial would it be in that setting, given the split-second decisions that have to be made and sound judgment decisions that have to be made? Would AI be? I mean, would they just be stuck to putting something on the board like assistance needed stat? You know what I mean? I feel like that's as much as it can go for. I wouldn't feel comfortable with anything more than that.
Kevin struggles with technology.
I know I struggle with it, but there's so much on the line at that point, Dr. Castro.
Well, and I think we need to add this to Dr. Castro, and this is kind of a follow-up with Kevin. In our profession, egos play a big part. You have lawyers like Kevin who think that
not true, Dr. Castro.
that their professional judgment is the end all be all for a decision to be made. And I would assume, well, I'm not going to assume. I don't think doctors have egos at all. But let's take that assumption. I mean, is that part of the pushback? Do you believe with the AI, the technology, that doctors are saying, wait a second, you want to take away my professional judgment on what I've learned, what I experienced, what I've been trained to do? You want to take that away from me and put it in this technology? I mean, do you see that as kind of a pushback as well?
Yeah, I talk about this a lot. There is that entitlement, or hey, I'm a doctor and godlike complex. Some doctors have that, unfortunately, but I call it the bell curve distribution, and it's skewed with AI adoption. Like I'm an early adopter, but I'm gonna be a little not PC here and say I feel like in general, doctors that are older are the ones that are fighting me the most. Mm-hmm. Doctors that just graduated, that grew up with the iPhone, that have no other way of seeing life, they love AI. Like they can't wait to use it. In fact, they're the ones pushing it. And so when you look at who's in power right now, it's the doctors that have years experience, have set the tone. And to your point of entitlement, yeah, it's tough to tell a doctor, say, hey, you're wrong. This is actually correct.
Sure.
And it's really tough, again, going back to not knowing what's under the hood. And so it puts us in a bad place. But with that said, I want to go back to Kevin's point. These are two examples that I always use in the ER world. One's kind of cool. I'm going to start with the cool one.
Okay.
So ChatGPT 4 has a way of taking a picture and you can upload it and it'll analyze the picture. Now, that technology is not, it's there, but it's not implemented because there's not enough GPUs out in the world to let them use it so that all of us can start using it, because it's too much power it's taking. So they haven't turned that feature on. But in theory, I can't wait for them to release it, because this is one of the first things I want to do. As an ER doctor, when seconds count, I have patients that come in with overdose issues. And normally the way the story goes is ambulance comes in, they literally throw pills at me and say, here, doc, these are what the pills we found on the bed. We don't know what they are. Patient obviously is unconscious. I have no idea because I can't ask. There's usually no family member. Mm-hmm. And so I'm like, all right. So I'm looking at these pills. Obviously, I can start looking at the serial number and all that BS and look at it, send it to the pharmacy and let them look at it and get it. But now, take my iPhone, take a picture, uploads, and then I could put like a little vignette. Now, in the theory, all this would talk to the electronic medical record. So it would know the patient's weight. It would know the history. So you put it together. AI looks at it and says, oh, this is Tylenol overdose. That is linked to the pharmacy. Pharmacy is like, oh, Dr. Castro has a Tylenol overdose. Patient weighs 70 pounds or 70 kilos, blah, blah, blah. Let me send the antidote. That whole process would take hours. By the time I call poison control, by the time I get the antidote, by the time I figure out what I need to do. Now with this technology, I could take a quick picture, it will analyze it, send it back, and boom, I have my diagnosis.
That's fabulous.
That's the first example.
Well, what are some other areas? Go ahead.
No. Kevin's ready to jump. Give me one
more.
No,
I thought you had a second example. That's what I was waiting on.
The second example real quick is it's 2 a.m. I'm a human being. I've been up maybe 20 hours. I'm exhausted. Unfortunately, just because it's late doesn't mean I get to like go to sleep. I got to keep going. So the human factor plays in. I'm seeing a patient, and I've seen patients a million times with the same thing. But how nice would it be? Again, I'm protecting HIPAA. I'm not going to put any sensitive patient information, but how nice would it be able to put it into GPT equivalent and say patient shows up with XYZ. What do you think it could be? And it gives me a list, and it says something that I'm like, holy cow. I didn't even think of that one because I'm tired. It's 2 a.m. And then I'm like, you know what? Let me add this test. Let me go into the room, ask this question. Now I'm able to augment my clinical decision process with AI.
Yeah, no, I think that's a fabulous example. And
It's incredible.
And I mean, it's no different than, we have all these complex calculators now, right, for engineers. I mean, that's a very equivalent example. But I'm interested to see which area of healthcare that you think large language models could most improve. I have argued that it's in the senior care communities, but I'm interested to hear what you think.
Now, let me ask you, when you say AI, are you saying specifically like GPT technology? Or are you just saying AI in general? Like,
I think,
give me a
the
better
AI
definition so I
that
know.
powers, different digital health solutions. So it may be some of both.
Yeah. No, I love what you just said. I actually saw, you got to hit me up later. I'll find it and send it to you. But I recently saw this cool diagram. It was based on an article, and it was talking about the elderly and how they would use AI. And that picture was just amazing. And it encompassed so many ways. And yes, just from the simple telemedicine. But then I talk about this in my talks when I go national keynote stuff that I've done. What about these printing your medications? In the near future, I'll have this printer, and say I need a medicine or adjustment, it'll be there. So you're my doctor right there on the video screen. You're seeing me and you say, hey, you need a patient X, then you send it to my printer and it prints the medication. And so to answer your question, yeah, I would argue that that's a good one because of so many levels to it. Because believe it or not, the most expensive part of healthcare is our elderly. It's the last couple of years of your life. And so why not use this technology to help you extend that life and the quality of life? And there's so many things from wearables to robots. I mean, we can have a whole podcast just on that one question.
Yeah, no doubt, 100%. Well, what's it going to take? I guess we've got all these competing things. Physicians are worried about being sued for medical malpractice. So when they're trying to use these more innovative digital health solutions, which do not have any clear standards right now, what do you think? And the standard would be for medical malpractice. What would a reasonable physician, do his due diligence? Yeah. What do you think is necessary right now before you, as a physician, would
let all your friends go first? Let all the other physicians go first.
Don't be the guinea pig.
Don't be first. That's all you need to know.
Yeah, and my ADHD brain's going to say two things. One, it's also going to vary on the zip code. Are we talking California, Silicon Valley, standard of care? Or are we talking, out in the country, Texas, where things are seen and done differently? So that'll be interesting. And so what will it take? I love this idea, and I don't know who coined this idea, but I actually like this. It's just like when we buy foods, we look at the label. I think we need that in AI healthcare. I think we need to be able to say, okay, here's ChatGPT. It was trained on this data. It has the following biases. It doesn't have data for the Indian population, doesn't have data for Africa, and literally be a white paper that I can look at it. Just like when I order a medication and then when you pick up your meds, you get this white paper that's like huge, thick, and has like all these side effects. Same thing. Why not give that to you in healthcare? So you look under it and say, oh, wow, I shouldn't use this in breast cancer. Oh, I shouldn't do this, and that. That way the doctor knows. And then the second part, it goes with the first, is we need to just educate. That's what I've been doing out there. Just educate doctors how to use it. And I call it the good, the bad, and the unknown, because there's a lot of unknown stuff that's going to start happening that you're like, whoa, I didn't see that one coming.
Yeah, no, I love that idea of having a label, a product label, so you know exactly. And that brings about an important point, is bias in these AI systems and algorithms. James, say if you were representing a Black pregnant female who, we know has not gotten equitable treatment, and the doctor was relying upon some sort of AI system to help manage the patient, what would you want to know?
I don't want to.
Don't look at me. Don't look at me.
Don't look at me. I mean, because I try to put myself in the physician's shoes in this AI technology, the ability to rely upon it, and what, from a professional standpoint, I'm required to do to, make sure that it's accurate. Because my concern would be, as a physician, in a situation where my ultimate conclusion of what should happen is different than what the AI says. Mm-hmm. Then what do you do? So I would want to say, look, this as a lawyer, protocol, procedure, make sure everything was followed by the books, whatever.
What about the data? What do you want to know about the data?
You're putting James on the hot seat right now.
I know. Sometimes you got to make them uncomfortable.
The data of what program? The AI is using.
Yes.
Well, I mean,
what if it trained it on all white pregnant women?
I'd have a problem with that. What if it relied upon the layperson in Africa, like Dr. Castro was talking about? I would have concerns with that. And obviously the physician needs to know that. Yeah. That, because if they're going to rely upon this, they need to know what type of data is being utilized to come to the conclusions that it is. Because I've got even as a lawyer, I've got a problem saying that the liability should be put on the physician.
Oh, yeah.
When they are relying upon a specific technology that just shoots out whatever that conclusion is.
I disagree.
I
fundamentally disagree.
I've got a problem with that, and especially if talking about the standard of care. If the reasonable person, Kevin, in that specialty relies upon this technology, it shoots out a conclusion. That's what happens. And, it's just difficult for me.
Dr. Castro, in that situation that James just posed,
coming back to that,
don't you think it would matter how much it varied from what you would, normally do, what you're trained to do? If the AI, gives you something just slightly different, then that's sort of more reasonable for you to rely on, as opposed to if it just gives you some wild, treatment plan for the patient.
Yeah, exactly. And this will be the interesting part. Fast forward 10 years from now, who is going to be sued on these kind of cases? Is it going to be a young doc that takes something that maybe doesn't have that clinical gestalt? Like I'm an old man. I've been doing ER for like 20 years. So it would take a lot of output from AI to convince me. And if it went way off, I'd be like, no, it's hallucinating. It's wrong. Whereas I feel like some of our younger docs, I'm dating myself, they're over-reliant on technology. They want to order the CAT scan, the X-ray, the blood work, and all that stuff. And then they go like, oh, maybe I should have asked this question. I wouldn't have done all that. And I'm like, oh my gosh. Whereas the older doctors are putting it all together. And if it got an output from ChatGPT, be like, now, show me the literature, show me the article, show me how I should practice this way. Like, I need to see it. And then that's how they would do it. But whereas the younger doc, I'm worried that some of them may just jump and say, yeah, let's just do it. That's what AI said.
Well, you're second guessing yourself when you're young in your career too. I mean, that's sort of like your default mindset. Whereas when you get more experience, then you say, no, I've seen this, 100 different times. This cannot be right. But I think that's an important point. And how do you train doctors? Go ahead.
When we're talking about, this is how AI wins.
Oh.
Right here.
Let's hear it, Kevin.
By perfect.
By hedging its bet. I think once it says as long as it doesn't give a definite answer, I think it's always going to be on, and I think that is how you'll always keep it on the physician's shoulders.
Sure.
By saying likely this, most likely this, that requires the physician to then do an additional layer of analysis or convincing of him or herself to reach a conclusion. Because the moment that, to James's point, it gives a definite answer. Like, this is tuberculosis.
Yes.
And it's not tuberculosis. And I relied upon it. It's definitely his fault. That's what I was doing. The program.
Okay. It's not the physician's fault.
Not the physician. And I struggle with that, James.
I agree.
Because there's a judgment that comes into everything. There's a best judgment rule that goes into there. And so I have a difficult time saying that you've comprised your medical decision with your background, training, and experience. I'm assuming other physicians that are working on the floor with you, and also your access to AI. and you made the recommendation to the client, to the patient, not the AI. AI didn't make the recommendation to the patient. AI made the recommendation to you. And you got to make that judgment. Hey, do I believe it or not? Which is also, I think, a physician's role. But I'd be more on your side if the AI said, hey, this is what it is. And it was wrong.
Well, maybe that's a lesson for people developing these sort of systems. But then how useful are they going to be? I think there's a lot of questions. I think they're just going to continue to move forward, and these issues are going to be tougher. That's why people in Washington are trying to figure out how to better regulate AI.
Well, I had this question. And this is maybe to James's point more than anyone else's. If we are talking about AI and what its capabilities are in the healthcare field, and I'm just talking about in an emergency room, is there a world where it's no longer, James, a good or a product, and now turns into a service based upon the fact that it is, and I'm envisioning like almost like a assembly line kind of vibe in the hospital, where we go to the hospital, Dr. Castro, we get in on a line, we run through machines, we run through x-rays, cats, whatever. It says, hey, this is what it is. You might need to go ahead and get a stent. Shovels you off to a room where there's a machine that has the technology to do it, and it gets done. That's what I
well, this
envision
is virtual healthcare where it's headed, isn't it, Dr. Castro? So
that's terrible.
Well, legal.
That's a scary world for me.
And from a legal perspective, Kevin, you're talking about a device that's going to be a product's liability claim versus a potential medical service that's going to be a medical malpractice claim. I mean, even from a legal standpoint, that's going to continue.
That predominant purpose is going to be a different.
Well, let's talk about this. When we talk about software as a service, right? Which is what everybody's going to. There's a cloud platform, and you log in. EHRs use it and everything. And if the AI is incorporated into that, is there even a product's liability claim that you can bring forth because it's a service and not a product?
Yeah.
I mean, that's going to potentially leave a plaintiff without some sort of recourse, and it's going to leave the doctor holding the bag, if you will.
Dr. Castro, this is a question for you.
Bring it.
Because I just
you're the one that gets me worried here.
No, well, look, this is off topic because you've written numerous books on AI and ChatGPT X, Y, and Z, and it seems like you've done a lot of investigating into artificial intelligence. And if you haven't heard of this young man, it's fine. He's an old man. Now, have you ever listened to Marvin Minsky's lectures on AI?
No, I haven't listened to any of his lectures, but I've heard them. But I'm gonna have to put them on my list now.
Yeah, dude, so good. I mean, he kind of always he was talking about this long time ago about AI and sort of the risk associated with it, and he had predicted this a long time ago. But I always listen to some of his lectures to fall asleep. Actually, to be quite honest with you, he's got like an ASMR kind of vibe.
Interesting,
but certainly cool to listen to. But in talking about where we've got to stop with respect to relying and supporting the practice, whether it be healthcare or law, on artificial intelligence. Where does that line in your mind stop in the healthcare sphere where you're saying, hey, this is too far? Like, for instance, I'm thinking about physician-assisted suicide and euthanasia and things of that sort. When do we decide to pull the plug? When is it okay to abort a fetus? Things of that sort. When do you think the line needs to be drawn for the assistance that a physician must have with respect to artificial intelligence?
Oh, that's a tough one. I like it. I like the deep ones.
Yeah.
I have to agree. The other day I saw an article about this machine that asks you questions, and then you walk into it, and it's a chamber, and then it helps you basically kill yourself. And it's relying on AI to ask the right questions. And if you answer it and it thinks like, yeah, okay, then, but you obviously have to buy that piece of equipment from the manufacturer. And I thought, that's just crazy to me in my mind. Like my preface, and I start every statement with "do no harm," and as long as I'm not doing any harm, then I'll move forward. But if I feel like I am causing harm, then I'm not. And so that one would be one that I'm like, ooh, I would not want to leave my entire life or something that's going to be relied on AI, just because I know there's hallucinations. I know there's going to be mistakes. Then the other part is, I always joke, it's like if I get upset with my kids and they do something wrong, I'm like, all right, Wi-Fi's turned off, and they freak out. so the same thing. I worry with AI that if we're not being a doctor, plain old be a doctor and we're relying on all these tools, then you're going to lose that profession. And I'm really worried about the art of medicine not being an art anymore, in the sense that we're going to rely too much on this technology. I'm not saying that we shouldn't put it away, but I think we should use it. But then it starts going into these weird lines like this euthanasia thing that we talked about. And I don't agree with that. That just feels wrong.
Yeah, no, I think we talked about that in the legal field using AI. You know, where is that line? Where do we lose the art of what we do? Last topic I really want to talk to you about is medical robots, right? So we know where this is going on.
You're talking about a legitimate medical robot, because you say black box and it don't mean the black box that I think about. And now you're talking about medical. Are we talking about a real medical robot?
Yeah, the Da Vinci robot, and literally the physician does not have his hands, you know, in the patient. He's, you know, using a little.
He's using the joysticks.
Yeah, joysticks.
Okay.
Do you see a time when they could map the person's body, set the program in the Da Vinci, and it just do its work?
Oh, 100%.
And then whose responsibility is it when something goes wrong?
It's down to that guarantee.
What do you think, Dr. Castro? Do you see that in the future of medicine?
Yeah. Sorry, I'm having to reach to my monitor. It sometimes wants to turn off. That one's a tough one. And just because so many variables can go wrong. And I think at the end of the day, you still need a captain of the ship, and that person should always be a human being. From an ethical point of view, it'll be interesting when the AI is they're predicting it'll be anywhere between 10 times to 100 times smarter than Albert Einstein. And so then at that point, it could say anything to any human being, and none of us would know if this is right or wrong.
I know, that's scary.
It's going to be very, very scary. Now, I literally just wrote about this, I would say about 2-3 weeks ago, maybe-ish. And I wrote about robots, combining robots, because two things are coming. OpenAI is coming out with a robot, but Tesla's coming out with a robot. OpenAI, the owners of ChatGPT, they're coming out through a second party that they have ownership with their robots by the end of this year. And I thought, holy cow, you put ChatGPT 5 plus the robot will have tactile sensation, so it could push and it would get that feedback. You put the eyes where it has the camera, and these cameras nowadays, some people don't know this, but there's cameras now. Like right now, you could get, if you had the software, you could guess my age through the camera, although you could do it without the AI. You could check my blood sugar, and it would tell you the average blood sugar that I'm having, again, just with that camera, and my blood pressure. I've seen other algorithms that this same camera, and I'm asking the manufacturer to hook me up for these Zoom calls, that will actually do a personality check based on our voice and your face expressions, and then I would be able to get a column here on my computer that would tell me everything about you guys.
That takes the fun out of dating, though. You know what I mean? I can't date her, man. She like eggs too much.
The problem with that, Kevin, is you would never have a date again.
You crazy? Look, they like, golly, he's possessive.
He is completely fake, everyone.
Well, what's that going to do for treatment at home?
That story, because all that technology is coming to the computer, and that computer is going to become literally a reality with the robot. And I know people are going to be like, this guy's crazy. No, this stuff, you can look it up and it's coming. And so it's going to be interesting to see what's going to happen to medicine. Since we're all legal here, I'm going to throw this out to you guys, and you're going to laugh at this one. My prediction is that we're going to start seeing AI in healthcare used in amazing ways, but it's going to come from a third world country, not from the United States.
Oh, of course.
Wow. Well, yeah, I mean, there's a lot of development going on.
That's where the testing phase comes. That's exactly what's going to happen. Yeah. I can agree with that.
We're going to see these robots and stuff like that being used out in these third world countries, and the United States lobbyists and laws and lawyers are going to say, nope, that's not going to happen. And then interest groups that are saying, no, we're not going to replace this profession with this. It's going to be interesting, and that's going to come.
Oh yeah, it will be interesting to watch. But I agree, there's a lot of countries in this game, which I think is what makes it really interesting. It's like a race. It's like the race to space, but it's the race to AI and medicine.
I think you'll see a lot of it. I agree with you, Dr. Castro. I agree with that the United States will be slow to adopt a model in the totality of integrating AI in our everyday lives. But I do think one place we will always be first, and that's with the armed services. And I do believe we will find applications for AI and artificial intelligence and bots and all that kind of stuff, and in the theater of war. as they like to say, James.
My ADHD again, sorry, Kevin, but this one I saw, this is crazy. There's an algorithm that maps out the terrain. You tell it how many missiles you have, how many tanks, what your army, the weather, and it tells you how to attack the other side. This algorithm will say you need this many tanks, you should attack at this time, you should deploy this tactic, and this is how long it'll take. And when I saw that algorithm, I thought, holy cow, like this is unreal.
That's insane.
Well, there's already a lot of research going on how to support field medics better using AI and using sort of digital resources. So I think you're right. A lot of times the military is an early tester on this sort of technology. So that could be a place we see it.
I could see a world where I pull my phone like this and I say, how much can James bench press? And I think it just, and there it is.
It'll be wrong. It'll be a lot less.
295 pounds. There it is. 295 on the dot, James.
That's 315.
These guys are workout fiends, and they're always in competition, Dr. Castro.
Love it. Well, actually, one more thing. I know we're about to be done, but I want to add this in, Kevin. I met with a company, and they're using the technology that came from the military. And what they did, they haven't released it yet, but it blew my mind. It's basically they created a virtual resident. And what it does, it'll ask you every question that you need to know. And by the time you... it pretend to be like a nurse triage, and then by the time you see me, the doctor, it would have gone through your entire medical record, your history, everything, and then by the time you come to me, it's giving me like all your old CAT scans, X-rays, all summarized, and it has an algorithm that will go through. It's like, oh, he's coming in for fever, she's coming in for chest pain, blah blah blah. And by the time they see me, it's literally like having a virtual resident. And then when I saw it, my mouth dropped, and it came from the military.
Yeah.
That is fantastic.
That's beneficial though. I could see that. I could see a real world application for that in the military with the volume they do in the theater of war on the need for assessment.
Absolutely. Well, Dr. Castro, thank you so much for joining us on the Zealous Advocate Podcast.
This was fun.
This was enjoyable.
So
we need another one. There's so much to talk about.
This one was a good one to do.
Please invite me again. I'd love to come again, and let's do it again. And that's a first for me. I've never said I want to hang out with lawyers.
Well, that's
me
fabulous.
either.
We'll do it. Don't ever offer anything to us. So we'll take it. We'll take you up on that. Well, thank you, and we'll talk to you again in the future.
Thanks, guys.
Have a good one.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Okay.
Have a good one.
Thanks for tuning in to the Zealous Advocate Podcast. Make sure to subscribe to follow us wherever you get your podcasts.